Hello, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a longtime journalist, having produced stories for CNN, Good Morning America, CBS News, and so on. I love asking thought-provoking questions, at least I hope they're thought-provoking. And here on A San Francisco Conservative, we are joined by my dear friend, the talented author, brilliant fellow, David Parker from San Francisco. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Thank you. So David is the author of two amazing books that I highly recommend, Income and Wealth, and his latest book is titled A San Francisco Conservative, hence the title of our podcast series here. So why don't we get right into that keyword conservative? Should we assume that conservative means Republican? There's a lot of, the Republican Party seems to be going through a lot of changes right now. I'm just curious, do you see yourself as a Republican as well?
No, I have friends and family who are mad at me, even for that title. But I'm a classical conservative, which is not a real word. The real word is classical liberal. It just means that I'm as free about speech. I'm as free about social relations. I'm as free about politics, about elections, as I am about the economy, that the government shouldn't be intervening in any of those things. And that's classical liberal. That's the founding fathers. In France, it's called liberal or libéral. If you're on the right, you just say, I'm on the right. If you're on the left, I'm on the left. They don't say liberal or conservative in France, and maybe even in Europe. If you say you're liberal, they know that you're a classical liberal in the British sense of a libertarian sort of. That's the closest to it. But I don't associate particularly with Republicans or libertarians. I'm really a San Francisco hippie.
Okay. I was there in 1968, believe it or not. I remember those days from childhood. Yeah. So,
I miss those days.
So, but I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more about the Republican Party. You say you don't identify yourself as a Republican. You are a classical conservative, as you said. I thought that was a great explanation. But right now, at the time that we're recording this episode, there are hearings, congressional hearings, talking about, what happened on January 6th, 2021 at the U.S. Capitol, and former President Trump's involvement or possible involvement, what really happened. And of course, many political leaders are saying, there was election fraud and so on. And it's just very interesting to me. I tend to vote, I'll be honest with you, with our audience here. I tend to vote Democratic, not just straight down the line. There was one election I did not. But what are we to make of the Republican Party now? People saying, yes, election fraud, and then are you supported by Donald Trump or not support? It's a very interesting time for the Republican Party.
Yeah, if I were a politician and I were conservative, I would be very mad that I have to deal with that and pretend that you're in favor of election fraud if you want to have Donald Trump's support because you think you need it. This country doesn't have a great leader coming forward. And if one came forward, it should probably come from the Democratic Party, because if a moderate from the Democratic Party would come forward and say that he understands classical liberalism. I read a book, I can't believe that I found, from City Lights Books, published in 1976, when written in 1974 though, when Jerry Brown was considering running for president. I would have voted for that man right there on the spot. It was complete classical liberalism. He's saying throughout the book, the citizens should stop looking to government to solve their problems. Government cannot. The problems are deeper than that. And stop thinking in those terms. That was one of his big main messages. So if a Democrat comes forward and says that, he would get the vote of the whole nation.
Amazing.
If Republicans who do not like what's happening would vote for that. And I vote Democrat very often, but I vote Republican very often also.
Okay.
I'm not even looking at the party. I don't like the parties, either one of them. I vote for the person, that's all.
That's great. Well, you are a thoughtful fellow, so I'm very happy to hear that. If I was to make a list of politicians, I think you might appreciate. I don't know if I would have put Jerry Brown on that list. That is really remarkable. So
He-
interesting. Yeah.
So he's not in politics anymore, but people get older, I guess. But if he would,
Remember those days? Mayor of Oakland, wasn't it, recently?
yeah, but if he ran today on that platform, he wouldn't win. He wouldn't get the nomination. He's way out of step. They would call him a Republican.
Yeah. Well, that raises a question. I'll try to phrase it properly here. I know this is the kind of thing you've covered in both of your books, especially San Francisco Conservative, and it's sort of who should lead the, well, I think I can even predict your answer, but who should lead, the people or the politicians? There's so much gamesmanship going on, and they say like things are at a standstill in terms of making real progress. There was recently a gun control or gun legislation proposal signed, and it was amazing. They said we haven't made progress like this in 30 or 40 years. But then again, I personally did not vote for Donald Trump. And but there's a lot of people out there, in the heartland and so on, who really said, I'm a Trump supporter. And like a lot of these politicians are still keeping that in mind. They know there's a constituency out there. And I'm just curious your thoughts, how do we break that this sort of impasse?
Donald Trump won in 2016 with polls, some showing 90% in favor of Hillary. All polls, a wide majority, and he still won because people lie in the polls. And because a consensus was reached in this country that neither political party had any intention of solving the problems that all Americans care about. All Americans care about the high cost of healthcare. All Americans care that the public schools are not performing well. And all Americans care that law enforcement can be pretty lax on the border and within cities. No one disagrees. And everyone says, let's try something new. Says nobody, they held their noses and voted for Donald Trump. That might not, if he ran this time, they might not do that. But the first time they did, because there was a consensus. And our government was, by the founding fathers, was built to be very small and with checks and balances. So almost nothing can be done, can get through unless everybody agreed. That was, the gridlock was built into the system. And if we have gridlock, that's a good sign. It means people are talking. There was no gridlock when Hitler came into office. There's no Hitler, or when Xi in China came into office. We have gridlock. That's a healthy sign.
That's a good point.
And this nation has always been fighting, even fist fights in the Senate historically. So that's a healthy sign, not an unhealthy sign.
That's a great point. I had not looked at it like that. That is very interesting. So I just want to mention real quick, if you're joining us midstream here, this is an episode of a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin, as longtime journalist and question asker, and my brilliant friend David Parker from San Francisco. David's books are Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. And David, you mentioned a phrase I really just want to pick up on with another question. You'd mentioned checks and balances. I know that you're a great admirer of our founding fathers and the masterpiece that is our U.S. Constitution, which I hope we return to soon. There's some talk about that in this investigating committee and all that. But there have been some interesting decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, speaking of checks and balances. And I just wonder what you make of those decisions, especially overturning Roe versus Wade over 40 or 50 years now.
There's some great documents and thoughts that went into our Constitution. One by a fellow named John Locke. Government is to protect life, liberty, and property. Jefferson didn't make that up. That's John Locke. And he also said in the second treatise on civil government that only Congress should pass laws, nobody else, because Congress is elected, it's accountable to the people, as you were saying earlier. The Supreme Court, 9 lawyers who happened to get the job, They're not accountable to the people. So they shouldn't be making law. Law should be debated in public, in hearings, and the public can come in and contribute. That's who should make law. The Environmental Protection Agency, that's a government agency, should not be making law. Congress should make laws about what our standards should be and tell the Environmental Protection Agency to enforce them, but not pass the buck because they're afraid of not being reelected because they made a decision. And with abortion, they didn't want to make a decision. Throw that on the Supreme Court. Let them make the laws for the nation. That's wrong. And the Supreme Court says that was wrong. That there's nothing in this Constitution that says anything about abortion. That's a personal decision. And all the Supreme Court justices who voted against it said, throw that back to the states. That's where it belongs. It doesn't belong. We're not supposed to make law like that. We're not scientists. We can't say, well, 4 months after that, you can't crush the egg. Okay, make it 6. Make it 6 weeks. They shouldn't be making decisions like that. That's just way beyond what the community. If your community says no to abortion, you vote with your feet. You move to the next community. You move to another state. The Mormons were persecuted for so long, they says, we're sick of it. We're moving to Utah. That's our state now. We're going to make our own laws. And if abortion is against the law, that's the law. That's the law in Utah, which I don't know if it is or not. It's not for the Supreme Court to make a decision like that. That was the reasoning behind saying no.
And no, I definitely follow what you're saying. Do you think throwing it back to the states or properly reassigning it to the states, saying we're not going to tell you when life begins, we're just
right. Yeah.
I mean, if you envision, a young mother and whatever the circumstances may be, she becomes pregnant or mother to be in Texas or one of these states that has come out, Louisiana come out against Roe versus Wade. Are individuals like that at risk of losing their rights? The majority says, no, you can't, seek reproductive alternatives and that kind of thing.
If you're living in a state that says that and you disagree, and that's so important to you, then you have to leave. Some of those states are doing something a little bit vicious. They're saying, if you leave, we're going after you because you left to avoid a state law. But one senator from one of those states says, to be realistic, I don't know how we're going to enforce that. So that may not ever come to pass. If you flee the state, they're not going to come after you. It's too much. They have better things to do.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned, okay, well, abortion is not mentioned literally in the US Constitution. Of course, it's not. Apparently, if I remember correctly, when Justice Clarence Thomas wrote, if he was the author of the decision in that case that I'm talking about, but I think that Justice Thomas was mentioned saying this could open the door to reconsider other issues such as gay marriage. There in California, especially in the San Francisco area, it's known for really, safeguarding the rights of the LGBT population. And if they want to get married, should they have that right, or are we at risk of, changing that again as well?
Yes, it's the same thing. Supreme Court has no business saying whether approving or disapproving gay marriage. That's not what the federal government is. That's not their job. Clarence Thomas, who's the toughest of them all, he says, these issues belong in the states. If your state says it's okay, that's it. If your state doesn't say it's okay, move to another state if it's that important to you, or get the law changed in your state. But don't ask the Supreme Court to pass a law like that. It's none of their business. They're not qualified to pass laws like that.
Yeah. There are, I guess, in the media, we call them hot button issues, in politics, hot button issues, reproductive rights, gay marriage, gun control also. There certainly seem to be a disturbing number of shootings, school shootings, grocery stores, 4th of July parade, and so on. And is that also a state's right, or if we leave the rights in the states, is there some danger that somebody with evil intentions could purchase an assault rifle, take it to a different state, and carry out a terrible plan. What are your thoughts about that whole gun control issue?
That's called the Second Amendment. That's part of the Constitution in that sense. Two things. There are maybe 330 million people living in America, and there might be 330 million arms. It speaks for itself. We're not going to control that. It's like saying you cannot smoke marijuana. Every household in America might have some marijuana. You can't control something like that. It's not nobody's business. You're not hurting anybody. And there's a famous expression that's kind of perverse, but if you outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. They don't care. And there's a case that was made that's brought up sometimes in Europe. It was very easy for the Nazis in Europe to round up all the gays, all the Jews, the gypsies, anybody they wanted to round up. It was forbidden to have firearms in Europe. There was nobody could resist. And Americans are that won't fly in America. You can't have a firearm. You can't pass a law like that in this country.
Well, these are certainly thought-provoking issues and fundamental, to our rights, which are so important. Freedom.
Supreme Court did make one error out of their 3 decisions, in my opinion, or I haven't, is that funding of religious schools. That's pretty clear that we separate church and state, and is doing something good for the wrong reasons is very bad. The public schools are failing, like I mentioned, and so people are saying, well, if people are pulling their kids out, parents are pulling their children out, and they're going to religious schools, irregardless of the religion, and they're going to private schools, then if that's where the education is, if we have money for education, it should go to all those schools. But that's just because the situation is bad. That's not the reason. It's like saying we should allow abortion because otherwise women may have illegal abortions and they may die from those. They're not always very healthy or safe. That's no reason to. Those are all inferior reasons. The law should be based on principle.
Well, we could go on and on with this. There's, again, so much to think about, but I appreciate your bringing this perspective to the conversation. And I just remind our viewers, our listeners, to be sure to visit David's website, davidparkeressays.com, where you can purchase copies of Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. You can also purchase David's books on Amazon. So great to see you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you, Tom.